Spies, international intrigue, high-tech military, and special operations missions. Today, we're going to take a look at Cold War thrillers and ask, do these still hold up today? Please join the conversation. Hey everybody, welcome to D3 Reads. It's Eric, and today I want to go with you into a literary time machine and go take a look at some Cold War era novels and thrillers and see if they're just as enjoyable today as they were when they were first published. Now, if you're new to the channel, normally we take a look at mostly science fiction, horror, and fantasy type novels. Those are my favorites, and I spend a lot of time on them, but we'll also review anything that strikes our interest. And last year, Jeff, the co-host of this channel, he's our at-large audiobook reviewer. He did a video on action thriller audiobooks. And he touched on this a bit, but I was having a conversation with him just recently and posed an interesting question, which was, would we enjoy these books today, reading them today like we did back in the 80s? Now, for those of you who are kind of keen of eye or you have really good resolution on your monitors, you might notice that I have a gray hair or two. I think there's one right there. It's true. That's because I'm a Gen Xer, and I grew up during the last 2 decades of the Cold War. When I joined the military, I got really interested, as I think a lot of folks did who joined the military, in some of Tom Clancy's work. And so I started, and that kind of opened the door to reading a number of Cold War era thrillers, and really enjoyed them at the time. I've got some favorites. We're going to talk about some of them and a couple of different types of authors, but I wonder, do they stand the test of time? As a Gen Xer, does enjoying these novels really require you to have lived through that moment, or do younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, do folks who are from younger generations enjoy these books as much as say, someone from our generation? So I would like for you to drop a comment if you're no matter what, tell me what generation you're from and whether or not the types of books that we're going to be covering today are if they stand up, if they're still as good as what I tend to think that they are. Another reason why I bring this up is because when I was preparing for this video, I came across a book review of one of the books that we're talking about, and the reviewer said that it just took so much time to build up in there. And I remember reading this book and thinking it flew, that the whole thing flew. And I wonder, was it bogged down for this reader because the setup wasn't really as important as just the action? So again, if you have a thought on that, drop a comment and let me know. Do these types of books set or that were written during the Cold War, do they have the legs to continue going? So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the conversation. But before we do, I have a confession to make. We're talking Cold War era books, but there are some big authors that I have not read, and I don't know how I let them get by. I'm talking John le Carre and Ian Fleming, obviously for the James Bond books. So I feel a little inadequate addressing this because I feel like my scope is limited a bit. So if you are fans of le Carre or Ian Fleming, let me know what book would be a good one to start with those, because here's what I'm doing. I am putting together a future video to talk about books I can't believe I haven't read yet, or series, and I'm going to put together a plan to address that in 2026. So I would love your input on that. For these types of thrillers, what would be a good place to start, particularly with Ian Fleming? I'm particularly interested in James Bond. Should I start at the beginning, or is there a better place to start? So let's go ahead and jump into this, and we're going to start with who I think of as one of the biggest names in Cold War techno-military fiction, which is Tom Clancy. Now, Tom Clancy wrote a number of books over his lifetime, and as many of you know, his writing has kind of lived on past him. You'll see Tom Clancy's Op Center and Rainbow Six and that kind of thing just being kind of refreshed in video games and other spin-off books and that kind of thing. I'm talking about the books that he wrote. Now, we're going to restrict our conversation to 1991 and before, because we're talking specifically the Cold War, and we're going to count the Cold War era as ending with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union in August '91, I think it was. So I think pre 1990 or up to 1991, well, and maybe 92, 93, you know, there's still the kind of that era glow, I guess. But we're going to restrict our talks to that because there are some books of Tom Clancy that I really enjoy that came after that. But if you're talking about the Ryan verse, the Jack Ryan verse, I kind of lost interest after Rainbow Six, which I think was published in 1999, I believe, 1998. After that, it kind of, I lost interest because, well, we'll get to that here in a second. But the very first book that Tom Clancy wrote was, and had published was The Hunt for Red October. And of course, a lot of folks are going to associate Alec Baldwin and that first in the Sean Connery movie, which is a great movie. I really enjoyed that. But the book was his first foray into this. And it's a neat story because I guess he submitted the book to, I don't think it was a Naval Warfare Center. It was a naval publishing house. And one of the editors came across it, and they ran up to the powers that be and said, we got to publish this because if we don't, someone else is. And I think that there's a bestseller here. And sure enough, it kicked off Tom Clancy's career. Now, I read The Hunt for Red October long ago, do not remember much of it at all. I've got three favorites that I'm going to talk about here with Tom Clancy. The first one being Red Storm Rising. Now, interestingly enough, this is not a Jack Ryan novel. This book, which was co-written with Larry Bond, I believe, it doesn't say that on the book, but I believe Larry Bond helped him with this, and keep that name in mind because we'll be talking about him here shortly. Red Storm Rising is a fictionalized account of war between NATO and the Soviet Union. And what's really intriguing about this book, and what I felt was one of the reasons why I enjoyed it so much, and I wonder if this still is relevant today as far as, because meaning is it in the forefront of people's knowledge, is that the storyline, the engagement for the most part follows what was considered to be the most likely course of action between the Soviet Union and NATO fighting a land war on the European continent. And so that right there, the way that that Clancy was able to bring to life this scenario, which was gamed by military personnel for decades, and I read up on when I was in the military, I became familiar with it as well. It's just, it really brought the whole thing to life. Now, the thing about these types of books, military tech, they call them military techno thrillers, is that there's a big emphasis on high-tech weapons and the people who develop them and have to use them. And it's something that Tom Clancy really has a gift for, and it comes alive in this Red Storm Rising. So the thing about this book, I loved it, and it just kind of seared into my head, was that it took the big fears of the Cold War and turned it into a gripping novel. The only thing that happened in here that doesn't really align closely with I guess main theory is that the Soviets, minor spoiler, make a decision not to use nukes early on, and so that way you have more action, and it makes it less of a depressing novel, I suppose. The second book of Clancy's that's really stuck with me over the years is The Sum of All Fears. Now, The Sum of All Fears, you can see how thick these books are. Tom Clancy tells just these wide-ranging stories, and he integrates just so much into it. The characters are complex, the plots are layered, and what's really neat about this is a lot of the story gets pushed along by human error, mistakes, misunderstandings, and it works really well. The story starts off, I believe, during the 1967 war between Israel and its neighbors. And Israel, which at the time, and I guess still technically today, is an undeclared nuclear power, but they lose a nuke. The nuke gets lost in some desert, and it gets found eventually by terrorists who are going to use it for a terrorist attack against the United States. So The Sum of All Fears, it's a gripping story. It's a Jack Ryan novel. This is one of the ones that, I had limited time to read when I was in the military, but I devoured this, as I did, I think, most of the Jack Ryan novels I got my hands on. Jack Ryan, he was an intelligence analyst, and because I was an intel officer, I wanted so much to be Harrison Ford in these. So I guess there's a little bit of projection on here, or wishful thinking, I guess. I'm gonna, if you indulge me for a second, one of the things I think that Tom Clancy does well, because a lot of folks will, I think, rightfully or understandably contest or point out that these books glorify, American military war and jingoism, all that. But Tom Clancy, I think, does a good job of raising gray areas. Um, you think about things like Clear and Present Danger. That was I first saw the movie, the one starring Harrison Ford, of that, and then I read the book later. It does a good job, I think, of bringing into the reader moral gray areas. There's a lot to the war on drugs, and the political decisions that motivate certain things, and what it means to step outside the bounds of the law and the Constitution and that kind of thing. And I don't think that Tom Clancy shies away from that too much. So there's, I think, some really good thoughtfulness that goes into these books. Now, I will say, this made a real impression on me. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put a link in here if you're interested. But a couple years ago, I used to write for Task and Purpose, and I wrote an article. They had a series. I don't think that they still do it, at least not very often, called That One Scene, where it talked about movie scenes that really resonated with military veterans. And I wrote an article about one of the scenes from Clear and Present Danger that really stuck with me. And I think that vibe carries over, or was also maintained from the book too. So the last one I'm going to bring up is one called Without Remorse. Now, Without Remorse is a slight dare. It's still in the Ryan verse, but its main character is John Clark. John Clark being the one that the character that William Dafoe plays in Clear and Present Danger, but he's a regular in the Jack Ryan books. And it talks about his origin. The book is mainly set in the 1970s during the Vietnam War, when John Clark, I think he's going by John Kelly at that point, he is a Navy SEAL who was deployed to certain missions, to a mission into Vietnam. But there's also a parallel story going on that deals with his interactions with the crime lord and drugs. And I mean, it's a brutal story. There's a lot of graphic violence. Well, I think that's in a lot of Clancy's work, but Without Remorse, I think there's some particularly graphic scenes. But it really does a good job of fleshing out the character of Clark. And again, that stuck with me for a while. But this one, again, is set in the 70s, so during the Vietnam War era, still well within the Cold War period, of course. And I felt it was relevant back then when I read it in the 90s. And so I wonder if it's still relevant and resonates today with anyone who's read it, who's, again, from a younger generation. So please, if you've got thoughts on that, let me know. Now, I want to step back a second to Red Storm Rising. I mentioned there's a character, or the co-author, or a person who helped Clancy write that, which was a fellow by the name of Larry Bond. Larry Bond, he was, I think he does games. He's still alive. And he wrote, after Red Storm Rising, he winds up writing a book, I think it's published in 1989, a book by the title of Red Phoenix. And this one, it's essentially Red Storm Rising, but on the Korean Peninsula. And talks about a second Korean War. And like Red Storm Rising, the genius of this story is he takes relatable characters, and he throws them in the midst of what many thought was the most likely scenario for another Korean War. Now, this is no nukes in here. I can't remember if he addresses nukes in that, but this is testing of the first North Korean nuclear weapon. But basically, what you have is a tense peninsula situation with agitation going on from agitators from North Korea, and then you have this rapid explosion of military violence across the northern border into South Korea, and then you have this conflict. Bond does this fantastic job of rolling in, the naval, air, and ground pieces of this conflict. And again, this was really relevant to me because I think I read it right before I actually did a deployment in the late 90s to Korea for some uh, 60-day operation that we had going on. It wasn't secret or anything like that. As a matter of fact, it was covered in the local press. But I read it because I was interested in that kind of fiction at the time, and it was haunting how close it was again to how much folks thought that if there was going to be a war, this is how it was going to be fought. So it was extremely realistic from that point, and I felt that the story I just tore through the book, and that was a thick one too. I'm furious because I can't find my copy of it. I think it's buried in my basement in some old boxes. I got to find it. But Red Phoenix by Larry Bond, realistic depiction, I think, of a North Korean conflict, and but I wonder if my perception of it is being colored because one, I got to spend some time in the South Korea as part of the military forces arrayed there with the South Korean military. And I wonder if that changes my perception of it a little bit, because that was the one that I found a book reviewer had said that it was a little bit slow getting to the meat, where I felt like it certainly was not. So if you've read it, let me know what you think. But if you're interested in that kind of take, now I guess Larry Bond did a sequel to it years later. I've not read that, so I can't speak to that particular sequel. And finally, this next series of books is a completely different type of book. And matter of fact, it's so different, you might think I'm cheating by including it, but it is the Destroyer series starring Remo Williams. Now, Jeff talks about Remo, I think, in The Destroyer in his book on action thrillers, and I'm including it because there's over 100. All right, these books are getting published, I think, in the 70s, early 70s, and there are over 150 Destroyer books. That I found listed in Wikipedia. I've read a chunk of those, probably 15 or 20 of those over the years, and I just loved them. The each particular story is very, very different. You might be talking about going up against criminals one episode and going against assassins in another episode, but the structure of the story I think is fascinating. You see, Remo Williams, if you're not familiar with it, the authors Warren Murphy and Richard Sapir create this character. He's a Newark cop who gets framed for some crime and he gets put to death, but the death is actually faked, and Remo Williams is pulled into a secret spy agency called Cure. And he's basically turned into a special assassin. Now, the whole thing about Cure is this. It was created in the books by John F. Kennedy to be a mechanism to fight America's enemies outside the constraints of the Constitution and the law. And it's really fascinating because this idea that during the 60s things were so chaotic, the Cold War was so intense, and social unrest was so intense that this fictional JFK decided he needed to do this. And I don't think that they were trying to take any kind of particular aim or slander against Kennedy, because what they're clear at, because the Remo Williams books span well into the 80s and probably into the 90s. That each president who has come to power since is when they're briefed on Cure and its mission and the fact that it has no real constraints, the idea here is each president is repulsed by it, says they're going to dissolve it because there's no place in our society for that, but then they always come back and use Cure to fight whatever crazy thing there is going on. Now, these books are not realistic. They are brain candy. I think Jeff called them that in his review. I totally agree. They're brain candy. The martial arts there's two main characters. Remo Williams, who's this special agent, assassin kind of guy. And then you have his master, or his trainer, named Chun, who is he comes from this village in North Korea called Sinanju. I said North Korea. And basically the United States slips in there, gets Chun out, and they provide gold and things like that, payments to this little town of Sinanju in exchange for Chun to teach Remo these martial arts skills that are so insane that you can't help but but laugh at it. I mean, he does things that are absolutely impossible. They're superhuman abilities. I remember one vividly. I think he's fighting some criminals, and Remo taps a dude on the forehead, and this nickel-sized cylinder slides out of the back of the dude's head, and he just drops down dead. He's absolutely just unstoppable when he's in the zone and he's fighting. And there's also this connection, the destroyer. I don't know if this aspect of it evolved from the story or not, but there's this connection with Shiva, the destroyer, and I mean it's kind of bizarre, and each book will touch on it to more or less degrees, but they're just a fun read. But what's interesting is just this whole construct that was kind of born out of the Cold War, having a Remo operate outside the bounds of the law, and it's all dependent on his own personal moral convictions on what he's going to do and what he's not going to do. And interestingly enough, there's this special arrangement made by the folks who run Cure, so that if either Chun or Remo go rogue, there's a way to deal with them. And it's just, again, it's a fun series. If you want Tom Clancy type techno military reading, this is not it. But they're surprisingly touching. Now, I can't remember specifically the ones that all the ones that I read, and I'm sure that some are better. There are some that are just probably not as good as others, but I'm going to just call out, I've got a few of them still in my library. There's one called Coin of the Realm that is just, it's bizarre, and it's just so much fun. In this particular one, Chun and Remo go to this, it's essentially kind of an Atlantis kind of thing, an island called Mu that had kind of vanished off the face of the earth, and it's back or something like that. I can't remember. Because these are brain candy and they are relatively short, if you just want a fun, action-packed read that touches on this whole Cold War paranoia and construct, give it a shot. I think you might enjoy it. I can't tell you. Like I said, I've probably read 15 or 20 of these over the years, and I think I want to revisit them because it's a riot. But that's what we got for today, guys. If you have any recommendations on Cold War type thrillers, please let me know. Let me know if you've read any of these books and if you think that they're worth, if they still have legs. And again, thanks guys so much for your time, and have a great day.